Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got Christian from Evaluate, who's going to talk to us about his company and about NFTs. So yeah, Christian, before we dive in, do you want to just give a little bit of your background, where you started, and how you got into NFTs and crypto?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Christian Dittmeyer. I'm one of 3 co-founders at Evaluate.Market. Before this, I worked in cybersecurity. So I worked at Rapid7 over by the TD Garden as a data analyst. Before that, I worked at Iora Health doing the same thing, and then kind of had a finance background. I actually took a course here in 2018, I think, related to like data analysis when I was transitioning my career here. So it's kind of weird to be back in the same building but talking. But so I started Evaluate a year ago in January with 2 of my co-founders that I met playing Xbox Live. So we still play Halo 3 together, and they're just fantastic software engineers. And then we stumbled on Top Shot and sort of started building for that.
Awesome. That's crazy and kind of like a serendipitous. Why NFT specifically, or what was sort of like the aha moment for Evaluate?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of happened accidentally. So my co-founder Alex and I were kind of into daily fantasy sports. We were losing money doing it, but we were using code to like optimize lineups. And then we stumbled on NBA Top Shot. And if you guys aren't familiar with NBA Top Shot, it's essentially NFTs of NBA moments. So you can go on their platform, you can buy like for me, it was like a Devin Booker shot. And they also have this kind of pack experience where you can buy a pack and reveal like 3 to 5 moments of like your NBA players, which can go anywhere between like, $1, $2 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I had heard of CryptoKitties like when I was out here, thought it was kind of silly, but we stumbled on NBA Top Shot and we're both big NBA fans. Ended up buying some, and we watched the prices just skyrocket. I think they were worth like 8x what we paid within a week. So the idea is like, okay, let's build tools instead of like doing daily fantasy. Let's build tools to buy the best Top Shot moments and become millionaires off of Top Shot. And then quickly after that, we realized it's probably better as sort of like a tool for everybody to use. Released a site, I think February of last year, and then within 3 weeks, we had like 1 million page hits in a single day. And at that point, we were comfortable quitting our jobs and sort of going full time at it.
Yeah, that's crazy. So maybe can you dive into like what Evaluate is, like when the company was founded?
Yeah, so we started off as a Top Shot analytics tool. Now we're moving more into sort of adding different chains and more projects. We have 22 projects on our site today, but we mainly, I think around 93% of our users are flow users, right? So NBA Top Shot, Eternal, which is like Top Shot for Twitch, NFL All Day, and UFC Strike. And what we do is basically we'll show you how the general market's doing. We can show you listings across these different platforms. We'll help you value your portfolio, and we'll also let you do analysis on individual Top Shot moments. So if you go on our site, you can drill into specific NFTs and see their entire transaction histories, see how like NFTs similar to ones that you're looking at buying or that you own have sold for, and then make better decisions around NFT pricing via sort of like a platform.
Cool. That seems super helpful. Are you guys like Top Shot specific, or I mean, is that like the main one, or do you guys expand into other things?
Yeah, so we do have, I think, around 18 Ethereum projects on our site. We're hoping to expand that to, I think, around 800 more in the next couple of weeks. There's kind of an interesting situation with Ethereum where listings are fragmented and they kind of live in these gated APIs. So if you think of like OpenSea or Variable, all of these have off-chain order books, right? And they do this to save you money. So you don't pay $50 in gas just to list an NFT. But that's really tough for data sites, right? Because you have to interact with their API to get them, and they're rate limited. So unfortunately, there's protocols and things that are emerging to help grab those listings, and I think that's going to help us expand. But yeah, right now around 18 Ethereum projects. We've kind of picked them around technical challenges. Like we started with Bored Ape Yacht Club, probably selfishly, like I had bought 2 and wanted to be able to kind of analyze that kind of stuff. And then, and add like ERC 721 tokens. We had a Gutter Cat game because they were ERC 1155. I think we did VFriends because they had an auction contract and we hadn't dealt with NFTs like that. But I think the goal now that we've kind of gone through and added all these different types across like gaming and PFPs, we want to go through and kind of extend to hundreds of collections.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so I guess like, what's interesting to you about NFTs specifically?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think one thing that's interesting compared to crypto, and I do like crypto, is it's sort of more of like an attention economy and the ability to kind of invest in things that maybe you understand, right? So if you're an NBA fan, you can go on Top Shot and maybe have an edge on other people because you understand the content better. And I think it's a little bit more engaging in that sense. And there's also kind of this community aspect of it to where you can buy tokens and sort of participate in these gated clubs and feel more like an owner or invested in it compared to, you know, maybe when you're going on Reddit and other things where there's no financial part of it, where you feel more like a spectator. So I think that's interesting. And then also sort of just this idea of having persistent inventory across different websites and having a wallet that different applications can plug into that's composable enough to where you can build on it, whether you want to build for all of NFTs or for a specific project that you're interested in. So I think that's kind of things that like we really like about NFTs, but it's still sort of early. I think it's hard because of sort of the success of NFT projects like Bored Ape Yacht Club or others where the absurd kind of sticks out, right? So when you think of NFTs, a lot of people think of like $300,000 monkey photos instead of the idea of like we're able to kind of form communities and put capital behind it and have vaults around things that people kind of have shared interest around. And I think that's kind of a powerful idea, and it gets lost in sort of the absurdity of some of the prices for the more popular collections.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And where do you see NFTs going from here? Like it's obviously grown from, you know, basically nothing, but it seems like we're starting to see different kinds of NFTs. You've got obviously the Bored Ape Yacht Club stuff. You've got GameFi coming out with kind of like in-game NFT assets. You have sort of like your original like artists who actually have like digital art. What other kind of forms of NFTs are you guys seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that's interesting, like even more so than just the individual applications, if you think of like digital real estate or gaming or PFPs, is kind of the idea that they're all sharing the same account, right? So as sort of like a collector, people can go into your wallet and see like what you're interested in. And it also kind of gives you the ability to sort of move around, right? Like if you're interested in gaming, and it's just crazy because like gamers for the most part hate NFTs, but I think it could be super powerful for them, right? Because let's say you put a ton of time into this game, right? If you play Fortnite a ton and you spend tens of thousands of dollars playing that, let's say you're on the extreme case, you can't move that money with you to the next game, right? So I think the sort of like the ability to have like your interests be fluid, and let's say you're a huge NBA fan, but you get into a different sport or you get into a game, I think that's kind of exciting. But yeah, I mean, you see it with like PFPs, you see it in music. I think there's a lot of exciting platforms kind of coming out to where artists don't have to go to labels and they don't have to kind of like rely on platforms like Spotify or others where they make extremely small amounts of money per play. And so it's interesting from that perspective. And then I guess, you know, digital real estate is interesting. But I think the gaming application is probably like the most straightforward. And I think within like the next 1 to 2 years, I think that's probably what we see as being like the easiest transition because people who are gamers are already used to spending thousands of dollars for digital goods or skins. Whereas it's maybe a little bit more of a jump for like the average music listener.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it seems like the NFT market right now is like mostly on Ethereum. But you guys obviously do a ton of stuff with Flow, which is kind of like a dedicated NFT platform. Are you guys seeing, you know, like where are you seeing the activity move to? And like, you know, what's the sort of like difference between maybe like Flow or some of these other, you know, smart contract platforms when it comes to NFTs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I mean, there's tons of different chains, I think, and a lot of them are sort of competing to be the standard. And it's tough because if you're an Ethereum collector, you generally tend to just collect Ethereum NFTs. And if you're a Solana collector, a lot of them tend to just buy on Solana. But you know, I think obviously Ethereum has done super well in terms of like volume in the last like year or so. Flow really did well last year, particularly like in January, March, and it's kind of picked up. But I think the different chains, at least right now, sort of serve different purposes, right? Like Flow is a layer one that's kind of designed to, you know, it's like proof of stake. It's sort of designed for commercial applications, right? And you don't have to worry. It's similar to Solana, right? Like there's not huge gas fees that like your average NBA fan or someone buying music would be afraid of paying. Whereas Ethereum, I think it has some of the best developers building on that platform, and it has super successful sort of projects that have already kind of come about. And I think you know, with the success of things like OpenSea, I think people generally buying Ethereum for other purposes. I think they've done super well there. So yeah, I mean, we like to collect across all of them. I collect on Flow, Ethereum. I haven't bought anything on Solana yet, but I'd like to. Yeah, they have different advantages. Like I think like Solana and Flow in particular, or maybe Immutable X is even a better example of having like no fragmentation of liquidity, right? So on the ETH, like things live on individual marketplaces and those listings live only there. And I think what makes more sense in the future is sort of to have either aggregators or marketplaces showing shared liquidity protocols, right? Where all these listings live in one place and no matter what marketplace kind of suits your need as a user, you're seeing the same listings.
Do you think that's going to happen on like Immutable X? Is that going to happen on Ethereum?
Yeah, it's hard to place bets. It's kind of hard to know. Like, you know, I think we've definitely we're super bullish on Flow. as a full disclosure, Dapper Labs is one of our investors, and they're kind of building the Flow ecosystem. But we really like Flow. We like Ethereum. And I think the goal for us as a company is I think we're like the one site that I've seen where you can connect your Dapper wallet and you can also connect MetaMask. And I think for us, we want people to be able to buy NFTs on the different chains that they feel comfortable and not feel limited to one chain, right? So if you want Top Shot, or if you're like a Top Shot or NFL all day buyer, but you also like collect Bored Apes or other, ETH NFTs, to be able to manage your portfolio in one spot. Because oftentimes it feels like if you, like I'll have NFTs that I only see like on one website, and it feels like it doesn't exist because it's not like where I'm looking every single day. So I think the aggregation side is something that we think is important, not just like on the portfolio side, but also on like a marketplace explorer / sort of like analysis tool side as well.
Got it. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Are you guys like looking to expand in those areas? Like you guys are walking on the data stuff first, but would you then go to offer, trading and other stuff? Yeah,
so we do have a Flow marketplace contract. We are we do want to eventually make it easier for people who want to sell NFTs on Flow to list and do that. But yeah, I think, for us, the goal is to really make the experience kind of live top of the funnel of the NFT experience and make it easier for people to research, but also find people to trade with or find listings that they're interested in and really have the holistic picture of what these NFTs are worth. So yeah, I could see us expanding into that. But really, I think our focus today has really been making the backend hyper generic so we can ingest NFTs from different blockchains that look very different, right? Like a Bored Ape token looks nothing like an NBA Top Shot moment that's like serialized and has completely different attributes. And ingesting them on two different chains and kind of making it to where the user can go on the site and see them in the same way is very difficult. But now that we've made progress there, I could see us getting into more chains and then hopefully adding stuff like on the social side so that you can find people to trade with and then find like what other people are thinking is interesting or is valuable on the platform.
And so maybe like getting into sort of like the NFT and figuring out which projects to buy or, which projects might have more potential. Like, what do you guys typically, maybe you as an investor, like, what do you typically look for?
So I'll preface it by saying that I have no licenses or accreditation and I'm not in any way, like I sold my second Bored Ape for $800. So don't take any financial advice from me. I've definitely made plenty of mistakes. But I think like what I hear most people say is sort of just invest in the things that you either know a lot about or that you are interested in, you care about. Because that way there's a little bit less pressure in terms of like just feeling like you're in it just for the money. And the NFT market in general is extremely volatile in both directions. Like I don't know if any of you guys follow super closely, but like Invisible Friends being like 8, 9, 10, 11 ETH pre-reveal and then dropping to like, I don't know, like 4 or 5. So it's definitely risky, but
there were like the Pixel Mons too that went from like
those looked incredible. But yeah, so I think like what I try to do is that like one, you try to like analyze it from a perspective of like, does this have the potential to be like a cultural sensation, right? Like, but two, just like, is it fun? Like I was really fortunate to come across Bored Ape Yacht Club early, like on the second day, and just seeing like a ton of people put it as their profile picture, it just seemed like something where it's like, oh, this is kind of spreading quickly. And it's novel, right? I think that I think has kind of been at least for me personally, is kind of where I've seen the most success. But I've bought tons of projects that have either gone to zero or I've done very poorly. So a lot of it, I think, there's a lot of people who've made a lot of money in NFTs and it's just been off of being fortunate. So I think it's hard to go wrong though when you're buying things that you like to see in your wallet. And it hurts a lot less when you're looking at something that went to like 0 ETH if you really like it. So I tend to just stick to like what you like and what you think is appealing.
Yeah, definitely. I can I have a lot of the same stories where you buy an NFT and you maybe originally like intent is to flip it and then now all of a sudden you're like an art collector. So I guess like one other thing, like the NFT market obviously has been kind of like maturing really quickly and it's growing rapidly. Like from your perspective, what are like, have you seen like what are the sort of like big changes that you're seeing in the space? And like, is it maturing, or you kind of mentioned like there's a ton of volatility, like are things getting more liquid overall? Like, are there kind of like more players like entering into the space, or is it just kind of the few whales just kind of flipping things back and forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that feels different than maybe like last March or early last year is when you find projects that seem like promising, there tends to be like 100, 200,000 people now also trying to mint. So like getting in on the primary level is much more difficult. And I think it still feels like the industry may be a little bit immature in kind of selecting who can mint, right? Like a lot of it, like when people do like, or projects do like allow lists, a lot of times it's either like people who are just like super loud in their Discord or people that they know. So I think like ultimately, I hope there's more kind of like a democratic way to determine who mints things.
Yeah.
Or just, maybe seeing like higher supply counts, right? Like if you can support a mint and people are paying like 10 ETH pre-reveal for 10,000 of them, maybe you could have gone to 30, 40,000 or at a lower price. But yeah, I think like that feels different. It's also sort of, I think, more difficult in terms of like last year and sort of earlier on, there was less projects coming out per week. So it's really easy to kind of get involved in ones that you like, maybe you thought were promising. It's much harder to keep up now in the sense where it's, everybody wants to, spend a couple of weeks to create a project and then make $10 million in a single day, right? So you just see tons and tons of projects, and it's a little bit harder to determine like what you should mint and what you shouldn't. And also harder if you're someone who's like thinking about building an NFT collection. It's much more competitive now, right? Where there's a ton of projects coming out each week. So to kind of stand out and to make a difference, or like stand out, I guess, from like a standpoint of like people wanting to mint, it's a little bit more difficult now.
Are you seeing kind of like, I guess like mainstream artists or, like basically people from traditional art or traditional brands kind of getting into the space? Like I've heard, I've read that there's like, I don't know, like McDonald's is buying like metaverse land and having like their restaurant in there. Like, yeah, what's the trend there?
Yeah, I think like it is interesting to see bigger companies sort of come out, like I think like Nike comes to mind, Adidas getting involved, and I think it's just interesting because it's kind of when you think of like Bored Ape Yacht Club or Gutter Cat Gang or sort of these NFT projects that have emerged, they're Web3 first, right? So like their entire, when you buy like a Bored Ape, you own the entire representation of what that is, right? Whereas if you bought like a Mickey Mouse NFT, there's already like an enormous amount of content out there that like you don't really have any like relationship to. But I think it's good for these brands, right? Like when you're able to see sort of this metric for, okay, I released this product and I can see like in real time what people are paying for it. And you also have these like communities that are gated and people who are super engaged. I think it's good for them to kind of monitor their brands. But it is, I think, at least today, I've been more interested in sort of these brands that are emerging Web3 first or NFT first compared to like, RT, FKT, and Nike coming together and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or Artifact, I guess is
right. Yeah, because like Nike like bought them, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels interesting that like all these companies are suddenly just coming into the metaverse and posting memes and stuff like that. It feels kind of weird, but but also funny at the same time. What like I guess like when you look at the NFT landscape, like what do you think are components that are still missing that you think like need to be fleshed out?
Yeah, I think like proof of identity in general is really tough, right? So I think if there was a solution for that where you could kind of limit or know that somebody who's minting or interacting with a contract is one person, that would open up a lot, right? Because right now you can make hundreds of wallet addresses. And I think that kind of missing layer, that like identity verification, maybe not in a sense where it's like, okay, if you mint this, we can trace it down to who you are. But knowing that one person like per wallet kind of exists, I think would open up a lot. And then I think like I kind of keep coming back to it, but I think the fragmented liquidity is really tough, right? It makes it harder for people to build like kind of in the ecosystem if listings are gated inside individual marketplaces. So I think in that sense, it's still early, and then maybe with improvements to Ethereum or with other chains kind of taking off, that'll be alleviated.
Yeah, maybe like double clicking on the fragmented liquidity piece. Like, what do you like? I guess to people who don't really understand that, and I don't understand that as much either. Like, what do you mean by liquidity is fragmented, and like what are kind of like solutions to that?
Yeah, so basically what that means is like listings, right? So when you go to sell an NFT, right now, if you go on OpenSea and you sell your NFT on OpenSea, your NFT listing lives there, right? And for other marketplaces or other applications, in order to have access to that and to know that you did that, they have to interact with your API. Whereas with something with like Flow or Immutable X, all listings, no matter where they originated from, whether it's a game, whether it's from a marketplace, they all go to the same pool. So anybody can build an application on top of that. Like think of us, for example, right? We do pricing, we look at all listings to say, okay, where does your NFT or one similar to it exist at the cheapest price? It's really hard for us to do that if we have to interact with APIs to grab that. So I think it's the idea of fragmentation is saying that we should all kind of share the same listing pool, so that when you list your NFT on any site, all the sites can kind of pick it up, compared to just the native ones or aggregators that have kind of circumvented API rate limits.
Okay, yeah, and so you had mentioned that like Flow and Immutable X, is that just because it's kind of like logic that's built into the smart chain, into the layer one, or like?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the only reason that Ethereum sort of has this fragmentation is because the gas fees are high. So what they do is when you create a listing on OpenSea, it's not created directly on chain. It's just assigned to X order.
Okay.
And that listing lives off chain, like in an internal system,
Got
right?
it. Okay.
But if gas fees were non-existent on Ethereum, everyone would list directly on chain. It's actually easier for these platforms, right? Because they don't have to go through and say, oh, does my internal order book match what's on chain? They could just go through and sort of use like Ethereum as a proof of
Got it. Okay.
sort of like the source of truth
Yeah.
for listings.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's basically like on Flow, you can just kind of put it right on the blockchain and people can go and like query that.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. Do you guys follow like L2s or like what are your thoughts on like NFTs on other layers?
Yeah, I think like we really thought Polygon was interesting, especially when I don't know if you guys are familiar with Zedron, but they did sort of this horse racing game and migrated to Polygon. The tough thing is the bridge process like is not very consumer friendly, right? Like going through and bridging to Polygon and waiting 20 or 30 minutes is tough. But it was interesting how Zed kind of sort of natively integrated with it. But I think people like any kind of friction like that is really tough in mainstream applications, right? Like it's already a step to kind of get normal users to go and buy like either a picture or a game asset or a video for hundreds of dollars. It's even harder to be like, oh, you need to buy this cryptocurrency, bridge it to this currency, or kind of like interact with it between the two. So not to say that like I think there's tons of smart people and there's a ton of money behind a lot of the L2s. I think Polygon's one of like Polygon, Immutable X, things like that. I could see sort of doing well, but so far we've really been focused on Flow, Ethereum, and then maybe Solana.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And then maybe like circling all the way back to you guys and Evaluate. Like how like you mentioned your 20-person company. Like, are you guys all remote? Are you guys based in Boston?
So we're 12 people right now. We're hoping to scale up to 20.
Yeah.
We're all remote. So we work primarily in Discord. We use Slack a little bit, mainly to communicate with other companies. But we live across the US. Mainly software engineers. Like I think we're hoping to get more into data scientists or into data science. So if anyone's a data scientist or looking to be, definitely let me know. And then also kind of like on the site reliability side, community managers and sort of like chat moderators, things like that is where we're looking to expand. Over the next year or two.
Cool. And then how is it like working at a company that's kind of like remote first, I guess? Yeah,
it's interesting. I think working and sort of being on the team at a website is super tough because it's obviously live 24/7. There's things that can go wrong all the time, right? So I think it's nice. I think we're kind of flexible in terms of like we all live in different time zones. We're able to kind of stagger when we're working so that we can kind of ensure things are going well. But yeah, I think it didn't feel like much of a transition just because before that, I think obviously with COVID, working from home. But I think we prefer it. Like we're not looking to move into an office. And particularly, I think Discord kind of, not a lot of people use it as sort of like their workplace platform, but it's super awesome in terms of just being able to like hop on calls for hours and it doesn't feel like you're like on like a work call. And then being able to screen share and sort of collaborate, I think has been big for us. But I think like it's probably similar to other crypto companies. I think a lot of them are sort of going more remote, and I think it works for the best. Yeah, for sure. And maybe like for your company specifically, like who are your clients? Like who's kind of like using the platform? Is it big, is it like OpenSea or is it kind of like individual people? Yeah, so mainly individual people. I think we have close to 70 to 100,000 monthly actives. Oh wow. That's been more, and when I think Flow and Top Shot were a little bit more heavily utilized, and then a little bit less competition there. But yeah, most of them are just NFT collectors. Usually they have 3 to 4 times the average account size, which makes sense, right? Like if you're buying like, let's say like an NBA NFT and you don't ever look at it, you're probably not using a site to like value it and keep up with the market and looking at different like challenge rewards and whatnot. But yeah, I think like maybe like not like the hyper advanced couple $1 million whale that's managing like institutional money or large amounts here using our site for the most part, but more so sort of like that either average collector or a little bit beyond average in sophistication who just really wants to understand the market or understand their portfolio at a more granular level. Yeah. Are you able to like talk a little bit about like what maybe like the demographics or like the behavior is like for your kind of like customer base? Yeah, that's a good question. I think like our average engagement is pretty long for a website. I think it's around like usually like 4 to 8 minutes compared to a lot of sites where it's like 1 to 2. I think that speaks more to like NFTs in general, just because people are very engaged around it. I mean, they like hang out on Discord for hours. Right. But in terms of demographics, I mean, a good portion of our users are kind kind of based on these sports NFTs. So it kind of follows that demographic, right? Like men in 2030s in the United States.
Yeah.
I think just because of like the demographics of like Top Shot and the NBA and the NFL and UFC. But yeah, I mean, we have a bunch of different collections, so that's probably different for like different collections as you kind of drill into the individual ones. But for the sports ones, which has been the bulk of our usage, that's kind of the distribution.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Are people like buying and flipping NFTs, or are they kind of like buying and then just kind of like collecting more and more like Top Shot moments?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, a lot of people, Top Shot's kind of unique in a sense where they do these sort of challenges where it's like, oh, if you have these 3 NFTs by this time period, you'll earn an additional one. Or they'll even do things like flash challenges where if you have like the leading scorer and the leading assists, and you put it in a showcase for people to see. So we'll see a lot of people doing that and kind of looking at live prices for that. But they're also, I mean, when you go to Top Shot site and you're signed in, you're looking at an individual listing, they actually link out to us at the bottom. So we have a lot of people who come to our site who are just curious about something that they're looking to buy and maybe not flipping, hundreds of dollars a moment a day or even more, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one thing that I wanted to ask is like, I feel like we were starting to see kind of like fantasy, I guess like fantasy sports, but basic like fantasy, but with NFTs. Like I think So Rare is like one of the big one with soccer in Europe, and they just raised it like an insane valuation. Do you think that's kind of like where Top Shot and these kind of like sports teams are going? Or
yeah, I think we've seen like applications sort of build in that functionality. I think a barrier is if you look at fantasy sports in general, like a big revolution with that and a big advancement of that was with daily fantasy, when it was like, hey, you don't need to invest a ton of money to get involved and to kind of bet on things that you like. And NFTs are kind of in the other direction, right? Like you don't want to have to spend like, or a lot of people, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people don't want to spend $500 to play LeBron James in a low stakes game, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting application. It's just not something that we've been particularly interested in, but it could add value to those NFTs as like in the sports range. And I think there's like fan controlled football and other kind of ideas around, hey, can we have these sports leagues that are directly owned by people who vote on like the rule set or schedules and things like that? So I think that NFTs will probably be more ingrained in sports, and there is an overlap of people who bet on sports who are not only into Bitcoin, because a lot of times like that's how you set to facilitate bets, but also into NFTs, just in the same way that I think that like Alex and I stumbled on it just from the financialization of sports, I guess. There's overlap there.
Yeah. And like, you mentioned that you work a lot with like Flow, like what else is like on Flow? And maybe can you just kind of explain to everybody here, like what exactly Flow is, the Dapper Labs thing?
Yeah, so Flow was built by Dapper Labs. Dapper Labs did CryptoKitties, I think back in 2017, and realized that they had like a lot of issues with Ethereum in terms of scaling. So they created their own blockchain, which was designed sort of for that mass amount of transactions and that throughput. So Top Shot is kind of like their first project. Since then, NFL All Day, the UFC, Ballers, which is kind of like a PFP collection. There's a new one out called Flux on this marketplace called Gaia. But yeah, they're a little bit less. I think like there's trade-offs, right, with a lot of these different architectures between decentralization and sort of like either transaction throughput or security and things like that. And also kind of like on the KYC side, right? Like, so on Flow, a lot of times you do have to verify your identity and go through a KYC check. But it's generally
is that KYC happening like when you go to buy a specific thing, or is like when
I think most of the time it's when you cash out.
Okay,
is when they begin to care. But the interesting thing about Flow and a lot of these applications is you can buy NFTs directly with a credit card, or with the debit card.
Yeah, that's great.
Whereas I think there's that double onboarding process for like an OpenSea or an Ethereum based one where you have to go through and learn how to like like open it, or
you gotta like open a Coinbase account and then like yeah, that's pretty annoying. Also like Coinbase, like if you have to wait like 5 days or whatever for your to settle. Cool. I guess like how much time do we have left?
We'll open up the Q&A in like 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. I guess like with Evaluate, like what are your what's sort of like, you guys have like a roadmap for?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I think for us right now we're really focused on adding more collections, particularly on Ethereum and Flow. Flow has a lot of, this stuff will bore you guys, but they're adding sort of these metadata standards and sort of standardizations around like how these contracts are created. And I think that'll allow us to scale heavily on Flow, but also adding Ethereum projects and then maybe adding different chains. And then a lot of work that we're doing right now is to make the platform faster. Like we know we need to be better on mobile. We're doing a lot of architectural changes to facilitate that. And then also adding different social pieces, which we haven't really like landed on what we want that to be like. But I think a big thing, and if any of you guys are into kind of building startups or applications, you want your product to be more valuable the more people that use it, right? So we've had over 1 million people use Evaluate, and the site doesn't look any different than if nobody used it, other than the fact that it still exists, right? So I think social pieces, whether it's like chat, sort of the, maybe like Reddit style forums, things like that, they can give you an advantage in terms of like you're more insular or defensible from a standpoint of like somebody can create the same product that you can, but maybe they don't have 1 million people on it commenting on things. And I think in general, just in Web3 and in crypto, a lot of the data is open, right? Like that's the point of it, is these distributed ledgers that anybody can read. So you want to think heavily about defensibility, right? Like I think about like aggregators, right? Like Genie XYZ, which lets you buy multiple NFTs from sort of different marketplaces and batch orders, came out super successful. And then 3-4 weeks later, Gem comes out and they're just slightly better. They save you a little bit more in gas and their interface is slightly better. And it almost makes the other one. So there's kind of like this, it's more tough in Web3 to build defensible platforms because the data is open. And you really have to rely not just on your interface, which has to be good, but also on social features and other to differentiate your product. So that if somebody builds the same thing using the same data, your product can still be useful and to kind of win out in that scenario.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And maybe like what's, if you were to say like an analogy of like what you guys are to another company that's maybe like in the traditional world, like what are you guys aspiring to be? Like, are you guys trying to build your own thing out? Like,
yeah, no, it's interesting. I think like for a while we really liked kind of like StockX buying experience for NFTs. We look a lot at like Blockfolio and sort of these portfolio evaluation tools. But I think Robinhood's something that we've kind of like I've thought a lot about, where it's like you're targeting that user who isn't like worried about ultra fast transaction speed or managing millions of dollars, but somebody who like is really interested in and wants to use your platform. That's just slightly more advanced than your average investor.
Yeah.
And I think like what they've done super well is not only like kind of like the interface and the ease of use side, right? And I think so. I think we've looked a lot at like Robinhood, Blockfolio, and I think StockX in terms of like I think StockX isn't cool because they're like this awesome pricing tool for shoes. They're cool because they're a better way to buy shoes and collectibles. So those are things that we've looked at. Like we really want to create an experience that you can buy like more, or you can make more informed and more fun, I think, buying experiences around NFTs compared to just like building the prettiest NFT dashboard, because when you do that, like anybody can come along and build a slightly better one, right?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so like, what does it take to like kind of like get an account with you guys? Is it like people just sign in with MetaMask or?
Yeah, so yeah, I think when we started off, we did have like email signups and Discord. I think we're moving more towards just connect your wallet. And we hate keeping people's data. So we don't collect anything like around like your name, phone number, things like that. And we'll probably even remove email in the future. I think OpenSea is a good example of how that can go wrong, right? Like you create a bunch of emails and people get used to seeing email messages from you. And then somebody creates like a phishing email with all of your branding. People tend to feel like you're responsible for that. So, but yeah, you can connect to our site using MetaMask. But most people, I think, use Dapper Wallet or Blockto, which is sort of flow wallets. And instantly be able to see like the assets they own. And then in the future, be able to buy and sell NFTs on the site. Yeah,
okay, that's really cool. And maybe more on sort of like bigger trends that is happening in this space. Like, do you have any views on like regulation in the NFT space, or like what that potentially might look like?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's definitely NFTs that you think would probably fall under the definition of security, right? Like when you're promising or having people expect returns similar to a dividend for something that they own. Like most of the time, I think a lot of these NFTs, particularly ones that like emit ERC20 tokens on a schedule that are supposed to have value, will probably see more regulatory scrutiny. I'm definitely not an expert in sort of regulations. If you could get like Nick Carter in here or something, he could probably give you a better idea of what that looks like. Yeah, I think it's hard because NFTs are it's a very broad definition, right? Like different tokens behave differently. Different ones have different rewards for holding. But in general, I think a lot of times regulation, even though like it's tough for platforms and they can kill certain parts of industries, it also makes it safer and a little bit more attractive for like everyday users. So there is like some small part of like, okay, if people aren't afraid of these like massive $90 million scams and things like that, because there's some piece of regulation that could work in a like sort of the Web3 movement's favor, I think. But I think it's sort of token by token, and it's something to kind of think about when you're looking at particular NFTs that kind of resemble securities, to kind of add that risk to it, right? Where it's like there is this regulatory risk of like, okay, if Cool Cats is considered a security because they emit milk that they provide a liquidity pool for, maybe there's danger there. So definitely worth thinking about, but I'm not the guy to tell you, like the ins and outs of the regulatory side. But a good question.
Yeah. And then like one other thing that I'm kind of curious about is like, where do you kind of see like a lot of the NFT activity? Like, I guess like, do you guys have like a good picture of US versus Europe versus Asia, and like, if people kind of have different preferences?
Yeah. So most of our usage, because a lot of them are American sports leagues, are in the US. I think like in more broad terms, a lot of NFT activity, I would say like probably 90% of volume happens in like the top 20, 30, 40 collections. So it definitely is very top heavy. And I think a lot of people lose that kind of framing, right? Like when you go like, oh, I'm going to start an NFT collection, I'm going to sell it, make millions of dollars. It's because you see the 2% that sell out and make millions and millions of dollars. So there is a long tail of spam collections, collections that have stolen IP from other ones. So I think it's difficult, and I think probably right now, like the best tool to kind of sift through it is just being involved on social and seeing like people that that you respect or that have made good decisions in the past, like what collections they're looking at. And then obviously like joining different Discord servers and sort of getting a feel for like what the plans are in terms of like different project roadmaps, if there is a project roadmap, and going from there. But it definitely still feels difficult to just go like on an NFT marketplace and then just buy something that you think looks good, because you don't even know if it's outside of like verification, which I think NFT project verification is like a huge problem. And I think OpenSea could be an entire company just being a company that verifies NFTs. Because it's really hard, right? Like how do you know if somebody's going to run away with the money? How do you know if they're, I think there's work that probably could be done there. And you see projects like Azuki, right, where they've had millions and millions of dollars in secondary that still aren't verified for whatever reason. So it's somewhat difficult to scale.
Got it. And then and then one thing that you had mentioned is that there's just kind of like this long tail of kind of NFTs, that NFT projects that go to zero or whatever. How big like is the like how many unique projects are you seeing? Like are we talking like hundreds of thousands? Are we talking like millions?
Yeah, I don't have we don't pay too much attention to like the long tail. It's a good question. I would say I think around 800 to 1,000 projects would fall under 1,000 ETH in volume. So those are kind of like the projects that I think that most people would interact with. But I would imagine that there's at least hundreds of thousands of projects on OpenSea. And I think that number will only scale as time goes on.
And then are you also seeing like more NFT projects coming into market, or has there kind of been like a cool off with the price of crypto kind of like also having being in a bear market? We don't look to, because we've kind of focused on the 22 platforms that we have and scaling to that 1,000 plus. We haven't looked too much at like the overall numbers. I would imagine that you'd see more and more as time goes on. Like obviously, like when people started to notice like success of things like Bored Ape Yacht Club, or for them like with CryptoPunks, those people started building then, right? So there's this sort of like, it usually takes a couple of months at least to get a project up and running. I'm sure some people could do it in a couple of weeks. So a lot of people, I think, were building high effort projects in May. Some of them might not even release projects until a month or two ago. So I would imagine they haven't slowed down, but I could be wrong. Yeah. Okay. And then maybe like just to chill a little bit, like what are your sort of like favorite projects?
I mean, I hate pumping like fun things in a sense, but
it's okay. That's all we do here.
I've gotten into art blocks lately. I think art blocks is interesting because they essentially like most of them, if not all of the outputs, aren't seen until like they're generated on chain, right? So like they'll ingest the token ID and then generate a random output. And it's really interesting from like a generative art standpoint, right? Where in the past, generative arts have been about like making that 1 in 100,000 piece that really stands out.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if like 10 of them look terrible, right? But with art blocks, you have to kind of ensure the quality of all of them, because if you have a piece that looks terrible, it ruins the whole collection.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like Screens by Thomas Peterson. I followed him for a while because he was like an art dev. Or he kind of maintains ggplot and a lot of sort of tidyverse packages in art.
Mm-hmm.
And so he made a collection I really liked. A creature recently. Trying to think about what other ones. I haven't Mutant Ape, but I like that.
They're live. Yeah, like you could see people in these like older classes and shit. You're right there. I'm like.
Hello.
Right. I think they're muted.
Perfect. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's what stands out. Oh, also one of my co-founders is on the team at Non-Fungible Fungi. They're kind of like invisible friends, where like they kind of walk, but they're really cool. I've got a couple of those as well.
Yeah.
So I gotta throw that one out there.
And what are some of like the coolest like roadmaps that you've seen for these projects? I feel like a lot of them, some of them are just, it's like they're gonna do like merchandise, and then like they're gonna do something, and it feels like every project is doing the same thing. Like, are you seeing any really like innovative or creative?
Yeah, it's tough. A lot of times it's like, you think of like Pixelmon, right? Where it's like, if you make big promises, there's often like, there's more risk involved with that, right? So one that I find is interesting, I did have a doodle for a while, but I sold that for our blocks. But my wife has a doodle, and I think their team is awesome. One of them actually used to work at Dapper. They're releasing, I think, space doodles today,
Okay,
which is
nice.
interesting, where you like wrap your doodle and receive like a different token in exchange. And then they've been involved like kind of like on the merge side, on the culture side, in terms of like building a brand, being involved at like South by Southwest, throwing events and whatnot. Maybe more similar to like Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? Which I think that's one I think I've enjoyed the most, because they like they did Ape Fest at NFT NYC, and they had like the Strokes and Aziz Ansari and like all these people at an event, right? And it kind of part of it like feels absurd and it feels ridiculous, but like it's interesting from a standpoint of like having a cultural impact, right? And being able to pool like funds from like millions of dollars of like a couple thousand of people's like shared interest, and then really putting those funds to work. I always get skeptical of the game ones, because it's incredibly hard to build a game.
Yeah.
I think NFTs are like a good kind of like method of doing it, right? Where you can sell assets before you make the game. But a lot of these, projects are promising like proprietary games, and like now it takes usually tens of developers,
like
millions of dollars
4 or
to
5 years to like
and a lot of time. So
but
I think the Doodles roadmap is interesting, and I think they've done an interesting approach in terms of not being deflationary, right? Like even Bored Ape, like they did like the Bored Ape Kennel Club drop, they did the Mutant drop. But like each of those kind of dilutes or expands access in terms of number of memberships, but it dilutes like the supply of like what falls under this brand. And I think Doodles has been very cautious of that. So it's interesting for the holders to know that like, okay, like we're not gonna have to worry about receiving these like airdrops that maybe benefit us in the short term, but like dilute the product overall.
Cool. I guess we'll open up to questions if any of you guys have.
Yeah, sure. So you talk about how you got to the point when you thought about raising money, and then maybe like some of the challenges, the common questions you face while doing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think advice that I've heard, and I think is super true, is just find the right co-founders. That's the best start, right? Because it's really, I think most companies that I see, particularly in this space, they usually have a team of 2 to 4 people. And I think, that's where things can go the most wrong, right? And in terms of raising capital, I think initially we were just hyper-focused on building something that we wanted to use, and then had a bunch of usage, and then like we had a couple of firms reach out to us, but then we were kind of in a better position to kind of network, and some of it's chance-based, but the environment still feels pretty founder-friendly in terms of going and getting capital. But I think like if you focus on building, and if you kind of create a product that you would use, and then kind of open that up, and like I remember when we first created Evaluate, I was like in Discord before Discord spam messages were a thing, like spamming people and like, hey, I saw you like Top Shot, like take a look at our tool. If you can get that initial traction, I don't think raising money is at least, this could change with like the current economic climate, but it's not the most difficult part, but also an important part, right? Like finding the right investors is super important in terms of like, especially early on, like they're taking a good percentage of your company because they're taking an early risk in you. They'll have a lot of say in what you build and sort of the direction you go. I think we really love like kind of like crypto native investors. I think they kind of have the right horizons in terms of when they expect to see returns and whatnot. But yeah, it's a good question. I think if you build and you have the right co-founders, you'll be surprised about like the inbound requests that you get. Because all these VCs have analysts that are like constantly looking at like up and coming platforms or things that are gaining traction, and you'll have a lot reach out to you. I think if you build like the right product.
Okay, and kind of along those lines, were most investors looking for a return in terms of like a token launch or something else?
Yeah, so that's a little bit more common. So like most of the time early on, like you'll either do like a safe agreement or a SAFT, right? So like with a safe being like an equity, like a future equity arrangement to where they'll receive based off of like a value cap, a certain percentage of your company based on next round's valuation. I think like, you know, it's interesting, different investors will have different appetites for that. We've only done equity financing to date. I think I think tokens are an awesome, and may even become like expected by consumers in the future in terms of like, I'm using your platform a ton, I want to be rewarded for that, right? Like, you know, imagine if like Spotify was paying us, you know, like as they kind of grew in value. When other companies start to do that and other platforms do, like if OpenSea ever did an airdrop, or if any of you guys have used like Lookshare, that might become the expectation. But in terms of investors, I think most of them seem pretty flexible between equity and tokens. And a lot of times the focus is not doing a token too early, right? Like you really want to build a product that's adding a ton of value and then go and do a token if you go that route. Because at that point, especially if there's like governance associated with it, you lose a little bit of control in terms of like what you're building. So I think getting the core product right, and I think OpenSea and others have kind of had the right mindset of like, let's approach this down the line, but focus on building right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, like in the early days of like when you launched your product, what was your strategy for growing your user base? Like, how did you get from 0 to the 1 million hits that you had?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like we were very fortunate in the timing. Like Top Shot exploded in usage as people were making a ton of money. I think Discord was really helpful for us. Like, so like I would see people post about like, oh, like I'm thinking about buying this LeBron James moment. Like, oh, like here's a link. You should like research it here. And then I think building a good product where there isn't alternatives. So our site was like much better than anything out there. We've since had other platforms come and kind of replicate some of the functionality and offer similar services. But in the beginning, we were really the only ones that were letting you check your live account value and look at individual stuff. You'll be surprised if you build a good product, like, and you help people make money, they'll often go and kind of evangelize it for you. So I think that's been the kind of the key, but there's always like that 0 to 1 push of like, nobody knows or cares what you've built, and you've got to like get it in front of many people as possible. And it's harder now too, because I mean, Discord spam, if you think about just NFT projects in general, like if you have Discord and you're online and you're one, you might get like 5 messages a day, but
yeah, I can't even like open my Discord. It's just like,
yeah, that's a good question. I think another thing that I wish I did more of, like if I could kind of go back a couple of years, is build more of a personal brand, right? And I think in NFTs, it's super easy. Just like get involved with any NFT project that you think is going to be promising, change your profile picture to that, and you'll probably like see like 500 to 1,000 followers. But if you can connect with the right people and build a personal brand, it's easier to get your products out there, right? Because people are like, oh, who built this thing? And then if it's like, oh, this person's involved with these communities, or if they, are a community manager at this company, or if they involved with this, they'll tend to trust you more. So I think, particularly on Twitter, I think I wish I had kind of been more involved in the beginning. But that's another way you can kind of bootstrap the first, thousands of users, is get involved with the community and then like show them that, and then kind of get things off the ground, I guess.
Were you posting content like just specific to NFTs, or like mainly about your company as well?
Mainly like direct links to the site. So we had it to where like, you could hyperlink to individual NFTs. So if anyone talked about that, I would like DM them like, hey, check out our site. Or if they're talking about like, oh, I want to find my account value, I'd reach out and say that. It's probably harder now. I'd probably get flagged as spam, but at the time, I think you have to kind of have that period where you're just like screaming it from the mountaintop in terms of like getting in front of as many people as possible. But I'm sure there's like Web3 hackathons. There's different ways to kind of get your product out there. But if you build something differentiated enough and early enough, I think a lot of times you just have to get in front of like that first like 50 people, or 10 of them use it, and then they go and tell people, and then there's kind of like the network effect of people will go and tell others and post screenshots and things like that.
Yeah, I think also like the space is like so new that like it's easier to like create something that like no one has ever done before, and you're kind of like the first one. Whereas like if you were to try to do something like that in like in regular tech, pretty much like all the innovation has been already created, and like all the tech companies that are coming out right now are just trying to like cannibalize like certain services, or like make things like faster or cheaper. But I think there's a lot of sort of like open spaces out there in Web3 that you can go and pursue.
Yeah, I would check out there's a new book, I think it's called The Cold Start, by one of the A16s, I think it's Andrew Chen. But it talks about that. Like there's this interesting strategy of like picking one particular community. Like for us, it was Top Shot, and building a product that's like specific and solves a big problem for them, and then expanding to other ones because you can have that base. And then a lot of times, like for us, like we built for Top Shot, and a lot of Top Shot users ended up going and buying a UFC moments, and so you're able to kind of hop to different areas and expand more broadly. But Web3 is a great place to build. Like you can get involved with particular NFT projects and build dashboards or like swapping applications and things like that for one project, and then take that as success and sort of leverage it into like a more broad scope or a more projects. So that's probably another way to kind of go about it.
Yeah. Any other?
Thank you.
The question on Zoom.
Yeah, there's two questions on Zoom. One is, do you plan on integrating with VV Marketplace?
Yeah, we get that question all the time. Yeah, I think it's hard because I could be wrong. I hope I'm not. I don't think that they're built on one of the like blockchain infrastructures that we support. We have had a lot of interest, and I think if there's a way for us to sort of fit it into our architecture, we definitely will. But immediately on our roadmap is more Ethereum projects, and then expanding in Flow as well.
Yeah, and then I think the other question is, what are your actual like sources of revenue?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now we're pre-revenue.
Okay.
So the idea is add as much value top of funnel in sort of the NFT space, and then think about value extraction later. We do have a marketplace contract with Flow that we can deploy and sort of make money on fees similar to OpenSea, where you get like 2.5% of the purchase price as a fee. But we haven't really, like right now we're really focusing on building, adding value, and making it easier for people to research NFTs in general, but also their portfolio. And then from there, I think the cool thing about like the space we're in is there's creative ways, whether it's token launches, you know, I guess you could go for like more traditional, like recurring revenue, like subscriptions and whatnot, or freemium features where it's like you pay for certain features. But we're not focused on revenue at the moment, outside of just adding value that later maybe we can extract, not just for ourselves, but maybe also push back to like our heavy users and reward the community for adding value to our platform.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
I kind of have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the concept you were talking about universal listings across marketplaces, what would be like the incentive for a big marketplace like OpenSea to adopt that anytime soon?
Yeah, I think for OpenSea, they probably wouldn't want a situation like that, right? Like, I think as of like a month or two ago, 97% or so of NFT transactions happen on OpenSea, right? So I think a shared protocol would be difficult for them. Other than sort of the architectural benefits, right? Like if they're not managing an internal order book, they don't have millions of people hitting, or not millions, but thousands of people hitting their API and botting their API and causing site reliability issues. If those people could directly query the chain or use like a node provider like that to bring that data in, I think it's better for like the ecosystem as a whole. But there are advantages to having an off-chain order book, especially if you're the winner, right? Because it makes it so much harder. Like even Lookshare, which I think has had a lot of volume, a good amount of it watch trading. It's really hard to be that upstart and to kind of take on the giant with 97% of transactions, and having an off-chain order book does kind of shield them. So maybe better for different non-Ethereum architectures that are being built like Flow and Solana to have that. And I think when you can have others kind of build in the same space, it makes all of those, it makes sort of advancements on that ecosystem, whether it's like Flow or Solana, better. Because if you're a game developer or a marketplace developer or an analytics site, you all have access to like a whole picture of the data, which on Ethereum right now, you really don't.
Kind of a follow-up question to that. Do you think it's possible for a competitor like Coinbase NFT Marketplace to eventually push OpenSea into adopting that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Coinbase definitely has a lot of sway, and I think they'll have, like if you look at their waitlist, I think a couple of months ago it was like 1 or 2 million people. And then if you looked at like OpenSea's monthly transacting accounts, it was like a couple 100,000. So they definitely could. They might have their own, you know, like maybe they'll have a similar strategy, whether it's for saving people money or other reasons to have an off-chain order book. But there, you know, I think there are other solutions to that. Like there's protocols that are developing that are like essentially querying those listings and putting them in things like Arweave or decentralized storage so that like everybody else can query that directly. And maybe they'll add like an indexer and an API services to let people query there. But there's also like aggregators like Genie and Gem, and I think things that we're hoping to do where they're going through directly and querying all those APIs. And then hopefully I think providing that data to others is useful. Because right now, if you wanted to like, if you had an OpenSea API key, which is hard to get, you can go through and query beyond your rate limit for all the listings that happen. So you can get an entire picture of like the state of the blockchain in terms of like what's listed for sale, unless you like use proxies or headless browsers to kind of spoof being million or thousands of machines and get the data that way.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Christian. Any last words?
If any of you guys are like, I think we're not really actively hiring like outside of data science and I think UI and UX. But if any of those positions, you can kind of find on Angel List our job listings, or you can email me if those aren't like where you're developing, but you have other skill sets. Feel free to email me. I'd love to help get people from Northeastern involved. Like I said, I did a class here, so it'd be kind of fun to get people locally because I'm the only one in Boston involved in the project. So
yeah, we got to get at least like one more Boston employee.
Yeah, definitely. So feel free to reach out. It's Christian at Evaluate.Market.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christian.
Cool. Thank you.
We need to
Can you hit stop recording?